Grândola Vila Morena, terra da fraternidade, o povo é quem mais ordena.
I'm very glad, Helder, that you have allowed me to interview you. You've got such an extraordinary story to tell about what we're going to talk about today, which is the anniversary of the Carnation Revolution, which is next week. And you are such an amazing person, great poet, the first culture minister, and of course a political activist your whole life. So I would really just love to hear some of your reflections, but first, perhaps just to explain what the revolution meant to you and a little of who you are in Portugal and the politics of Portugal.
Well, when the revolution happened, I was in London, exiled. I could not go back to Portugal at the time because I had been involved in some political action against the regime. In fact, I had been in the UK for about 10 years, being unable to go to Portugal. Then when there was the slight change from Salazar to the government of Marcelo Caetano, was a provisional transition to what some people, not me, believed could be democratic opening. Suzette and I, my wife and I, went to Portugal, were there for a few days. I was detained at the frontier, but nothing terrible happened. So when the coup, because it was to start with a military coup, happened in Portugal. In fact, it was very funny. Suzette, my wife, had got up earlier than me, and she shouted, "Revolution in Portugal." And I asked, in favor or against? Because at the time it was very difficult to decide how the pendulum would go, There was, and that was the crucial element, the wars in Africa, the colonial wars, which were very, it was an impossible situation for any regime in Portugal, because there were wars that could not be won by the Portuguese. Remain of an old ideology. Salazar was very proud that Portugal was the first colonial empire and the last. But it was a war that could not be won, and yet had not been totally lost, except possibly in Guinea-Bissau, strangely enough, being a very small territory. But in Mozambique and Angola, it was impossible. So there was a lobby to intensify the war effort. And that's why I asked, the revolution or the coup in favor or against, because it could be either. As it happened, it was made by middle-ranking officers, captains mostly, that had been fighting in that war, and both for military reasons, mixed in some cases with ideological reasons, they went against the regime. What they intended to start with was not really a revolution, but a change of regime and a change of policy. But some of them were more ideologically active, let's put it that way, managed to have that coup transformed not immediately into a revolution, but into a popular opening. And there was a very active participation of the civil population. And that really transformed this military coup into a potential, and I stress potential, revolution. Some people thought they were in the middle of a revolution. They in fact, invented the term, the revolutionary process in course, which became a sigle, so sort of, a plaque. But it was and it wasn't. It was very mixed. And there were, of course, many, many problems to solve, including what to do with the Portuguese nationals that were in the African territories, in the African future countries. Should they stay, return, their decisions? Another problem, which to me is, but we may talk about that later, was one of the unsolved problems of that transformation. What to do with the Africans that were fighting on the side of the Portuguese? That is one of the very difficult problems that was not entirely solved. Another aspect is that the very repressive political police, equivalent to Stasi or KGB or well, in some respects CIA as well, were fighting or working together with the military that did the revolution. So what to do with them? There were many, many complex problems which were not entirely sorted out.
So I think what I'm understanding is that after the revolution, some of these contradictions were still very alive in the society.
Yes, very much so.
And it
very
wasn't
much so.
a unified...
and indeed, some of the provisional governments leaned clearly to the left. The Portuguese Communist Party have been blamed very much for that, which is quite unfair in many ways, because if anything, they really worked very much as an appeaser of that sort of situation. I mean, one may suggest, has been suggested, that the Soviet Union was much more interested in Angola than in Portugal, and therefore they did not want to create a crisis in Portugal. Curiously enough, one of the political responsible for the area that included Portugal was Gorbachev. I don't know if at the time of the revolution, but certainly shortly before. So it was a very ambiguous situation, a transitional one. Now, in 1 year after the revolution, things were polarized and very much divided, and there was a confrontation between old-fashioned right and would-be left. And the country could have really entered into a civil war very, very easily. And there's something which is not very well known. It has been really disguised, is that there was a plan for the invasion of Portugal by NATO, sponsored indeed, modern sponsors, really decided and imposed by Dr. Kissinger, and there was a readiness for that invasion. I happened to have been in Portugal at the time, and we were waiting every day for a possible invasion of NATO, because Kissinger was convinced that Portugal could have become, in Europe, a sort of a new Cuba, was misguided. In fact, he was put right by a very, very experienced CIA man that had been posted as an ambassador in Portugal, Carlucci. Now, this man had been involved in all sorts of things, some very, very nasty ones, like the Allende story, the Congo, etc. But I mean, he learned some of his lessons and established a curious alliance with the leader of the Socialist Party in Portugal, Mário Soares, with, I think, the knowledge and the tacit approval of the leader of the Communist Party. That has not been really documented. And he managed, in very, very devious ways, to reach the president of the United States, was at the time Ford, bypassing Kissinger, and explained that no, it should not be an invasion because things would be solved peacefully. It's very interesting that, Kissinger was so, worried, so much worried about the Portuguese situation that he wanted an invasion, does not mention Portugal in his memoirs. That is a very, interesting story. Now, this also suggests that the reading that the CIA made of the situation is that it was not really a revolution in the sense that the left thought, or some of the left thought it could have been, but really some bubbles necessary and inevitable after the situation. And the priority universally became much more decolonization, look really what would happen in Portugal. Now, the unique, I think, thing which must be celebrated forever and certainly 50 years after, is that this is possibly the only instance, certainly the only instance that I know of, that a military coup became, through the will and action of the same military that did the coup, a democratic regime. That is marvelous, that is extraordinary.
That is definitely something to be celebrated.
Yes.
And when you look at this anniversary happening so soon, what are your thoughts for what has been achieved, and what are your concerns about the challenges that lie ahead for Portugal?
Well, Portugal became a normal Western democracy. The governments which have alternated between socialist and social democrat, let's say center-left and center-right, with the prominence of the center-left, more governments and more time in power. Both governments have changed the country in many positive ways. There's a network of roads, very much because of money from the European Union, and trips. Portugal is a small country where distances were immense. Going from Lisbon to the north, say, could take by car 12 hours. Now you do that. I did that, a fortnight ago in 3.5 hours. So the country in that sense has been physically unified. There have been very, very positive reforms in terms of education, creation of cadre, all those things that's very positive. On the other hand, there's been growing corruption, inefficiency in many aspects, and the creation of expectations which have not been fulfilled. Now, that is, of course, the great danger in any democratic regime. So when I say Portugal became a normal democratic country, it has the normal problems of democratic countries these days, with the rise of a far right. As happened in Brazil, as is happening in France, Argentina, the United States with Trump. But that is not really a problem of the revolution 50 years ago is a problem of now, which is aggravated by the fact that the democratic regimes that followed and tried to implement some of the achievements or expectations or even ideologies of the revolution did not fulfill entirely their goal. So one of the problems of Portugal, being a small country, is that there is really a quite high level of education, a reasonably efficient health service, creation of cadre, but not enough development inside the country. So now we have a new phenomenon. I mean, Portugal always depended, particularly during times of dictatorship, on immigration. Many Portuguese immigrated to Europe, Brazil, United States, whatever. They were illiterate immigration. Now we have doctors, people with PhDs that immigrate. So you may argue that this is a new world, a new Europe, there are no frontiers, etc. But that creates tremendous disquiet. And now, in the recent elections, the far right, the non-democratic right, had a huge percentage of votes. They, in fact, have become the third party, in the National Assembly. Now, I don't think, even though they may use that rhetoric of nostalgia of the pre-revolution times, they are not pre-revolutionary, they are post-revolutionary, and that's against that. Now, the very worrying thing is that a huge percentage of the electorate that voted for this far right party are young people, people of new generation, people that were not born when the revolution took place. So it's a mistake, I think, to say that it is a throwback to pre-revolutionary times. No, this is a new problem which democracy has to confront and deal with in new terms. It's not a nostalgic movement. Unfortunately, this far-right movement is not nostalgic. They look forward to something or other, which I find very nasty, extremely dangerous, but it is new.
Helder, I know you're a writer and a poet, and I'd like you, if you can sum up an image for you that is in your heart about the real joy of the revolution.
Oh, well, look, it was amazing. Of course, I mean, it's, you see, the coup, the revolution was made by people of my generation, some of whom I knew. I mean, they were military. I had refused to be a military, but was same age, more or less, So it was my revolution as well. I felt it. It was an immense explosion of joy, which was shared by the public. I mean, look, the image I have is that the Portuguese at that time, with wars, repression, suffering, bad economic conditions, were a sad and rather ugly population. When I went, to Lisbon after the revolution, they were so beautiful. It was marvelous, really. I mean, it was the most beautiful people, which shows that beauty comes from within.
Thank you, Helder.